Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos, and welcome to my patch 10.0.5 Protection Warrior Guide. There will be chapters down at the bottom that you can use to navigate to the different sections. If you want to just hear me talk about talents is mainly going to be the thing, I'll leave that till the end, and that's going to be a fairly long discussion because there's quite a bit going on with the Prot Warrior talent tree. Real quick, who am I? I'm a Prot Warrior. I played Prot Warrior just this year. This first year I played it on Mythic progression for a while. Got World 22nd this tier. Tanking with Pop-Tart Corn Dog, and am currently rank 1 on Warcraft logs for both damage, healing, and damage to bosses. Now, haters will say that's just because I'm in one of the few 8 out of 8 guilds that public logs, but that's not the point. The point is, Prot Warrior is really, 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 really good. It's taking a few nerfs in patch 10.0.5, but it's not going to be dead by any stretch. In fact, I suspect it will still be a really, really solid choice. You can use it for raids, you can use it for Mythic Plus, you can do a lot of good stuff on this spec, and it's really solid, especially against incoming physical damage. It does have a few weaknesses such as sustained magic damage, bosses where you are away from the boss and unable to generate resources. That's kind of a weakness of most tank specs as well, but you are more squishy if you're not able to actually use your globals on a target. And also stuff like bleeds, dots, those sorts of effects can be really nasty for warriors as well. There are a few dungeons where this means you have to do quite a bit of extra work to stay alive relative to stuff like a DK. But on the upside, you are bringing a lot of damage. Other tank specs can do damage as well, but Warrior has a lot of options to really do damage, especially where you're feeling comfortable and able to play more offensively. And you're bringing Battle Shout, and you're bringing Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry, a very powerful effect in raids, a little bit less powerful in dungeons, but also still good there. So really strong all-around spec, and really fun one to play this patch as well. The basics of the spec are pretty simple. When you're tanking an enemy, you want to make sure that you have your shield block up. That's kind of the big thing, so put your shield up, and then the enemy hitting you is not going to do very much damage, because you're going to block all of their attacks. If your shield block isn't up, you can still block their attacks, but it's just a chance rather than a guaranteed thing, and that will lead you to be taking much more damage. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, you have a lot of different abilities that generate rage and a few different abilities that spend rage. Your rage spenders, as mentioned, shield block, your best, always have this up anytime you're taking any blockable damage is a very good rule of thumb. But it's also good for damage because shield block increases the damage of your Shield Slam by 30%. Shield Slam is your big single target damage. It's just a great button. It resets sometimes. It generates rage. It does a load of damage. And yeah, it only hits one target. That's the downside of it. Now, your other ways of spending rage are Ignore Pain and Revenge. Ignore Pain gives you a 50% a shield, like an absorb shield on you, but it only works against 50% of incoming damage. So some damage will penetrate that absorb shield. Still really, really powerful. Your Ignore Pain does have a limit on how much can be stored up on it, so I recommend getting a UI that will show you that limit. For instance, if you see this package here in the middle, this is called the Afinar UI. I use this for most of my classes. Very easy weak aura package that you can just grab. But if you can see here, I'll hit Ignore Pain, and you can see it. I've got a thing there that's showing you how long is left on it, how much is left on it, and what percentage of a full Ignore Pain it's at. So I've got 44% of a full Ignore Pain. Now it's down to 20%. Up to 48%, 50, and it's 11 seconds left, 10. Something that lets you track all that information about your Ignore Pain is very good to have as well. The rest of your kit is primarily damage abilities. There are a few more defensives, though, that we should talk about. Baseline, you've got Spell Reflection. This is a 20-second cooldown, very short cooldown, 20% reduced magic damage for 5 seconds, and it can reflect spells. It reflects the first spell that is cast on you. This is really, really good against anything that can be reflected. There's a different set of abilities. Some abilities can be straight up reflected and do their damage back to the boss. Some abilities will be reflected, but they'll just be kind of deflected. They won't actually hit the boss again, but you still won't take any damage from them. And then some abilities you will only get the 20% magic damage reduction against, and the remainder of the effect will hit you. This video is not going to be a comprehensive look at all of the different effects that fall into that category, but it is something that you're going to want to try and figure out. And usually the first time you're kind of tanking a dungeon or a boss, a good instinct is to just see what Spell Reflect does against each of the abilities, and you can then use that to your advantage. There's some really surprising stuff that Spell Reflect actually works against from time to time, so that's a really strong defensive. Your other defensives, your cooldowns are Demoralizing Shout, 20% reduced damage for all enemies within 15 yards. It's on a 45-second cooldown. You've got Last Stand, 3-minute cooldown, giving you 30% max health for 15 seconds and healing you as well for that amount. And then Shield Wall, a 3.5-minute cooldown, reducing all damage you take by 40% for 8 seconds. Really powerful suite of defensive buttons that you can press as needed. There are some more in the talent tree that we'll talk about, and those abilities are each modified by your talent tree as well when we get to it. But for now, those are kind of the defaults of how those function. And finally, we should talk about stances. You have 2 stances available to you. You have Battle Stance and Defensive Stance. Battle Stance gives you 3% crit chance and reduces the duration of movement impairing effects by 10%. This is your stance that does the most damage. Defensive Stance reduces the damage you take by 15%, but also reduces the damage you deal by 10%. So this is sometimes bad for threat. Sometimes if you need threat, you need to actually go into Battle Stance. Otherwise, if you're new at this spec, I would say you can be safe playing in Defensive Stance most of the time as you're picking up the spec. However, eventually starting to fit in Battle Stance is something that will make you able to do more damage, obviously, and also can sometimes help with threat. Sometimes Battle Stance is actually safer because the threat issues, especially if you're undergeared, may actually be more important for you than the damage reduction. That being said, 15% damage reduction on no cooldown, right? You can literally just go D-stance for every tank smash on a lot of bosses, and that is a totally fine way to play. You are going to want to bind a button, a macro, that will swap your stances. Just copy paste this thing, I'll put it in the description below, make a macro with this, and that way you won't have to have a separate keybind for D-stance and Battle Stance. You can just have one that toggles your stance. You also want to make sure that you have something that lets you know which stance you're in. For instance, if I see this Battle Stance icon, I know I'm in Battle Stance. If I don't see an icon, I know I'm in Defensive Stance. Make sure you have something that is good near the center of your screen that will show you what your stance is in a way that works for you. Anything that you do not want to be in surprise Battle Stance as big incoming damage is coming in that you want it to be in D-stance for. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about the rest of the rotation as we get to it, but the basics, as mentioned, were keep up shield block, press your other buttons for damage, press shield slam on cooldown, and you'll be fine. Avoid getting to 100 rage is the other basic thing. Avoid capping your rage. There are a few different reasons why. One, obviously, is just that rage could be used for damage or survivability, right? You could use it on Ignore Pains, you could use it on Revenges for damage. But the other is for a talent that we'll talk about later called Violent Outburst, that you really want to make sure that you are not overcapping your rage and failing to generate towards your next Violent Outburst, or else you will be losing a lot of damage and survivability. Okay, real quick, before we talk about talents, though, I want to talk about some frequently asked questions about stats, gearing, what to craft, that kind of stuff. So, statistics for Prot Warrior, pretty simple. Haste is a really good offensive and defensive stat. It will increase your shield block uptime because your shield block recharge scales with haste, so the more haste you have, the more quickly your shield block will recharge. So for that reason, I think haste is a really good all-around stat that you can use in most cases. Versatility is a great stat for... It's really nice because it works against those nasty types of damage that Prot Warrior struggles with, such as incoming dots, incoming magic damage, incoming bleeds, that kind of stuff. Other stats don't work as well against that. Haste also does help you there, lets you generate your Ignore Pains faster and pump more HPS into your Ignore Pains, but Versatility is really good against that type of damage too. Mastery increases your chance to block. That line of text does not really matter because you rarely should be in any situation where your chance to block is relevant because you should have shield block up anytime you're taking incoming blockable damage, right? Your chance to critically block, however, does scale with Mastery, which does increase the amount you block. Generally, this is not super important defensively as well, though, because generally you are not dying to blocked incoming blockable damage. Sometimes you are, but it's pretty rare. Mastery does also increase your attack power, but yeah, not as good of a defensive stat against relevant stuff as Haste and Verse. And then Crit gives you extra chance, or gives you a chance to crit. This is good for damage. This is a good damage stat. It also increases your parry chance, but this is something that will reduce your overall damage taken in incoming, but Most damage that's going to kill you, A, is not parryable anyways, and B, you don't want to rely on getting a parry to live there. If you're taking, 100 small hits, you can count on parrying some of them. But if you're just fighting like a raid boss, and you're taking 5 massive autos, and you need to parry one of them to live, like that's not especially likely, even if you have quite a bit of crit, and even if it is, a 90% chance, you really want to be doing progression where 10% of the time you're going to fall over to that. Not good. So do not use crit, except if you are using it for damage. Don't think too much about that parry stat on it. Okay. Other stuff about Warrior. Trinkets to talk about. There are a lot of good trinkets that you can use. Most people have kind of settled on a few different ones. First of all, from the raid, we have Decoration of Flame. Decoration of Flame is from the first boss. It is a nice tank trinket that gives you some extra damage and also gives you a shield. And this shield goes up and the damage goes up as you're hitting more targets. And also it refreshes after a couple of seconds. So you can, this is actually really solid. I used this for all of Mythic progression. I used a Mythic Decoration of Flame. And it's really, really good in M+ as well because it does scale with enemies hit. Really good way to generate threat and defenses on pull, where sometimes that's when you might be the most in need of both of those resources. So Decoration of Flame, very much something I recommend getting your hands on. If you're looking for a nice pure damage AoE trinket, or a pure damage general trinket, there's the Windscar Whetstone. You will need to loot spec arms for it. But Windscar Whetstone, a great damage trinket option out of Court of Stars. You can also spec Fury for it, I guess. But then I guess you can't even get these relics anymore. So yeah, Windscar Whetstone, a great trinket out of Court of Stars. If you're looking for some other raid trinkets, there are the Whispering Incarnate Icon, very rare trinket, but in most raid groups you will want a tank to be carrying one of these if possible, so that buffs the rest of your DPS, and you're a pretty good candidate to be holding onto that as the warrior tank. A Manic Grief Torch off of Broodkeeper Diurna does an absolute boatload of damage, especially on single target, but yeah, especially if you're playing in a raid with idiots that die all the time, which I am, so very good trinket in that situation. Other than that, there's a couple of people that there's this seed pod or burgeoning seed that you can pick up off of Azure Vault. Some people like getting this nice little defensive trinket. There's Granite's Enduring Scale out of Naka Defensive, which is a defensive proc trinket. Defensive proc trinkets I tend to like a lot less than either offensive proc trinkets, offensive on-use trinkets, or defensive on-use trinkets. Because defensive procs, there's no guarantee you're going to get this when you need it. So it's going to provide you HPS over the course of a dungeon. It's going to provide you armor, which is damage reduction over the course of a dungeon. And it is going to provide you damage over the course of a dungeon, sure. But it's not necessarily going to proc in any relevant window where you're dying. So I, for that reason, tend to not generally play trinkets like this. But it can be nice to give you a defensive trinket that doesn't require an extra keybind if you are picking up the spec as a new player. And you don't want to deal with an extra keybind, definitely would understand that. Or just if you get one to drop at high item level, slam it on, it will be fine. In terms of what to use your sparks of inspiration on, and what to use, or is it sparks of innovation? Whatever, the sparks on, and what to craft first. I went with a weapon. I slammed the Fang adornments on it for some single target damage. I also went with the Allied Riskguard of Companionship, a nice solid versatility bump as my 2 embellishments. There are several other great embellishments, though, that you can get access to. Elemental Lariat, all around just phenomenal necklace that you can craft. There is a fire belt that is really good, especially if you get one of the very rare belts from the raid that procs off of fire damage. That's a way to deal fire damage as a warrior. There are also trinkets that you can consider as well, jewel crafting or alchemy trinkets if you just need to make yourself a trinket. Rings are really good to craft too. I have 2 crafted rings right now because they come with a socket, and that is very nice. That makes them kind of over budget compared to the other crafted options. And then finally, of course, you can just craft whatever you need to fill out your kit. I would generally recommend against crafting a shield unless you're not going to raid at all, because there's a shield from the raid from both Aranog and Broodkeeper Diurna. So most people that are raiding should be able to get their hands either on Aranog from the difficulty that they're kind of just breaking into, right? Or from Broodkeeper Diurna on the difficulty that they've got on farm, right? So like if you're a normal guild that's just starting heroic, you can get a normal Diurna shield, or a heroic Aranog shield. If you're heroic just starting Mythic, you can get a heroic Broodkeeper shield or a normal or a Mythic Aranog shield, right? And either of those will be really good options for you. So I would recommend generally not crafting a shield unless you're like a Mythic Plus only gearing source and you can't get yourself a good one to drop from M+, in which case, fine, go ahead and send it on the shield, because a shield is a really valuable slot. The block value on it is really solid damage reduction over the course of a whole dungeon, and it comes with a bunch of armor too, so it is a very nice thing to get at high item level. It's the reason I don't recommend crafting it is because it's so easy to get at high item level from the raid relative to a lot of these other slots. Okay, in terms of gems and enchants, most of this is pretty straightforward. I would gem either Verse or Haste, depending on which stat you're liking more and which stat you have less of. I gemmed towards Verse for Mythic progression because I felt like it was going to help against the things I was actually dying to in the raid. Although nobody on my server could make a stupid 3-star Verse primer stat gem, so I just settled with Haste on that one, put some Haste in these other spots because I wanted a little bit more Haste, but I've got Verse. Yeah, either Verse Haste or Haste Verse. Either of those will work great for you, and you can kind of look at these stats. Yeah, I'm kind of balancing the two and getting a lot of both stats. For your boots, you can either get health or movement speed. Either of those is fine. I think the health is probably going to be better for most people, but movement speed is really, really good too if you're not dying. For your cloak, I'd usually go for avoidance on tanks over the leech, although some people prefer the leech. Some people even prefer the speed, but I think avoidance is a really solid one here. You can use whatever. If you have a reason to prefer something else in the cloak, then go for it. And then for weapon, Frozen Devotion is generally the best option for raid damage. Sophic Devotion is probably a little bit better for Mythic Plus, and also a little bit better for survivability. So either of those options will work fine for you, or whichever is cheapest on your server. Send it on that. You'll be fine. Okay, let's talk about the talent tree. The warrior talent tree is one of the... I actually don't know for sure, because I've only mained one class. Like, this is the only class I've mained with this talent tree, so I don't know if I would be doing this many talent swaps if I was playing another class. But I guess I got to get my head out of the way. Okay, my head is in the way of this one bottom talent, so we'll cover that later. But there are a lot of different options in this warrior talent tree, and I have used probably 10 or 12 different talents that are currently unselected in this tree. This tree you're looking at is not a particularly important tree for anything. This is not... I actually don't even know what I was using this one for in particular, but let's talk about what the different options are and which ones you're always going to want. So, you always want battle stance, you always want defensive stance, you're always going to want War Machine, fast footwork, spell reflect, leeching strikes, rallying cry, furious blows, thunderclap, leap, frothing berserker, crushing force, reinforced plates, actually not bounding stride. You're gonna want most of those talents, and also the top bit here. You're gonna want Thunderous Roar, you're gonna want Avatar. There are a lot of options, though, in the rest of the tree. You're also almost always going to want Unstoppable Force here as well. That's the talent that my face is hiding. And usually you're going to want to put Thunderous Words in here as well. Now, what are your options over on the class tree? Well, optional points. Pain and Gain is what I had talented here, although I actually usually don't talent this. Intimidating Shout. This is an M+ talent that you could use here. Sidearm. Nice little damage increase. But not something that you need to use. Bounding Stride, even, also not something that you always need. So these talents, none of those are mandatory. Now, you need to spend 4 points from this loadout, which I think I recommend all the points in this loadout in basically all cases. Yeah, everything that's currently selected over on the warrior tree, I think I recommend in all cases. Oh no, not Seismic Reverberation. So I actually need to spend 5 points from this loadout in order to get access to the bottom of the tree. Now, where do these 5 points get spent? Usually I take Bounding Stride. I take Bounding Stride for most content, although you don't always need to. You can take Rallying Cry buff, make Rallying Cry better. In M+, I would almost always take Stormbolt and Intimidating Shout for some extra CC there. You can take Overwhelming Rage. It's just a place to dump some points to give you extra maximum rage, which is extra damage and extra buffer in your rage to make it so that you don't overcap. You can take Sidearm. Sidearm, a nice kind of solid choice you can take for just some extra damage procs. In theory, you can drop Impending Victory. So there's some people that do this, but I think it's kind of sus. This button is really powerful. Kind of like Death Strike, except on 25-second cooldown, but still really good. Really good button. For AoE situations, Seismic Reverberation, making your Whirlwind or Revenge. So first of all, you don't need Whirlwind on your bars. You can just have Revenge on your bars. Hit 3 or more enemies. It hits them an additional time for 30% damage. Really nice for any situation where you're going to be hitting Revenge on 3 or more targets. So basically always take that in that situation. This button, though, Barbaric Training, Revenge deals 25% increased damage, but now costs 10 more Rage. Now, Revenge already costs 20 Rage, so we're saying Revenge costs 50% more Rage and deals 25% increased damage. So that button is not actually good in terms of making Revenge more efficient in terms of converting Rage into damage. It does make Revenge better at converting globals into damage, because you can do it in fewer globals. And it means if you're ever Rage flooded, if you have too much Rage, if you're like in Bloodlust, that kind of stuff, you will be able to do a lot more damage with Barbaric Training selected. It's also good for Snap Threat in AoE situations, because that first global is going to do more damage. But generally, this is not a button you want to take if you are pressing Revenge a lot. It's a button you instead want to click when you are only pressing Revenge when you get Revenge procs, because your Revenge can proc and be free. And in that case, Barbaric Training, the Rage downside isn't there, and so you're just getting the extra damage out of Revenge. So that's something you would use in that situation. So let's talk about some single target or raid kind of oriented stuff. So in Rage, you're probably, on most fights, you're not going to necessarily be too interested in either of these buttons. Fights like Primal Council, you're probably going to want Reverberation. Fights like Broodkeeper Diurna, if you're on the ad team, that's when you might want one or both of these talents. But otherwise, not really something you need to mess around with too much. You can take Pain and Gain. This gives you a little bit of HPS consistently. You can take, actually, Wrecking Throw is OP on Razageth. You will use this on the fire side of Razageth to break shields, and also in the second phase of Razageth to do extra damage to those absorb shields. Really good global for that, so you want to take that on that encounter specifically. Usually, we don't take Berserker Rage or Berserker Shout or Piercing Howl. It's a lot of points to invest in pretty situational effects, but, you know, go for it if you want to. Again, Rallying Cry in raid fights where you'd want it. Intervene, I use this on Senarth to speed towards my friend and not get gripped off the platform. That can be a really cool button against that. And yeah, so okay, let's put in some points. Let's do kind of like just what I would do on a generic raid style encounter. Actually, let's put in some generic M+ style stuff here. So we put in like Seismic Reverberation, a point in Stormbolt, and a point in Intimidating Shout. Now, there's also Bitter Immunity down here. This is a 3-minute cooldown that heals you and removes all diseases, poisons, and curses. It's compelling, but the 3-minute cooldown part of this means people pretty rarely use this talent, so not something that I've actually, like, I tried to make this thing work, but even in places where I wanted it, it's like, I only really get to use this like once against something I want to use it 3 times against, so not a talent I've really ever selected. Honed Reflexes, giving you Shield Slam cooldown reduction and Pummel cooldown reduction. Actually, a little bit of a damage increase with the Shield Slam reductions, although it's not as good as it looks because a lot of your Shield Slams are going to be free resets anyways, but sometimes it does just come back up naturally. So anyways, however you want to spend your points here, however you want to allocate it, you know, maybe you don't want all of this and you want to put some points in Overwhelming Rage or get the Rally thing or take Pain and Gain or take Honed Reflexes, you know, there's a lot of different ways to spend those kind of 4 flex points that you get in the top of the tree. Once you get to the bottom of the class tree, some points are pretty forced. You got to take one-handed weapon spec, 5% damage and 5% leech. Pretty good. And then you almost always see people taking all of this stuff here. So we see Wild Strikes, Thunderous Roar, Thunderous Words, Armor to the Teeth, Avatar, and Unstoppable Force. And that leaves us with 2 final points to spend down here in the bottom. Now, if you're in like a Mythic Plus situation, usually this is going to go into Endurance Training and Shockwave for some more AoE. If you're in a raid situation instead, you can instead go for Uproar and a point of Cruel Strikes for the most possible damage. And yeah, so in theory, there's like some Shockwave builds that people want to mess around with. But usually Nobody really does that at the high keys or progression type situations. And then you can't really take Spear of Bastion because you got to put 2 points into Cruel Strikes to get to it. I mean, you could if you really wanted to, but very few Prot Warriors are doing that for that reason. I guess it's also worth talking about Titanic Throw here. I didn't mention that. There are some people that like this in Mythic Plus. A extra threat, especially against multiple mobs that are far away from you button, but not necessarily something that... it's not something that I've actually really felt the need for, and I've used that point instead in other places. But there are some people who like Titanic Throw as well, so you can experiment with this and see if you like it. One other place where I would recommend Intervene, by the way, is Halls of Valor. You can intervene on Fenrir, and your person who's running away doesn't have to run away. You can just keep tanking the boss and keep it in position. All right, let's talk about the class tree, or the spec tree now. So the spec tree also has some points of optionality. The Warrior spec tree is one of the few spec trees where it can be correct to only spend 9 of your points in the bottom 10 area. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So right now I'm spending 10 points down here, but there are some people and some builds where you'll want to do some other stuff over here. So first of all, let's talk about which points are kind of non-negotiable. All this top bit of the tree that you see here, pretty much everybody runs everything in the first 4 rows. Almost all of this is kind of just always there. Very few people run Unnerving Focus or Improved Heroic Throw, but we take almost all the other points there. Then AoE Taunt, Rend, and Brutal Vitality. Brutal Vitality getting nerfed in 10.0.5, but still a really, really powerful effect. Now, really quick before we go on, let's talk a little bit about how Brutal Vitality work. 15% of damage you deal, going to be 10% in 10.0.5, adds to your active Ignore Pain. Now, this won't create an Ignore Pain out of thin air for you. If I go hit something, you'll see I'm not creating an Ignore Pain out of thin air. But if you're wearing the set bonus, which is the 4-piece, during Vanguard's Determination, gain Ignore Pain equal to 5% of damage you deal, this actually does work really favorably together, where the 4-piece will give you an Ignore Pain even if you don't have one, and then Brutal Vitality will fill it up extra for you as well. The 2-piece as well, basically the way the set bonus works this tier is it makes you want to press Revenge a little bit more, and maintain this little 4% damage taken buff, and then getting that Ignore Pain healing. Not a huge deal though, and not something you want to be careful to not get baited and cast bad Ignore Pain or bad Revenges and leave yourself with shield block down, for instance. Okay, so you can see here, like I'm doing damage. I'm not creating an Ignore Pain just off of Brutal Vitality. If I Revenge though, and I get my 4-piece, then all of a sudden I'm building Ignore Pain without having pressed Ignore Pain, and I've healed myself without really doing any cooldowns or stuff. I've healed myself for 50k now over the course of that 12 seconds that the Ignore Pain was up. Okay, so that talent, even post nerf, still going to be better than Fueled by Violence. Dupe Wounds just does like 6% of your damage or something. Healing for 85% of that is not as good as adding 10% of all damage you deal to your Ignore Pain. Now, once we get below this row, actually, even on this row, we have some different options. Blood Surge is a good effect in AoE, where you're going to have a lot of bleed effects on a lot of targets. Instigate is good on single target, because your Devastator is going to generate you extra rage, so that can be nice on pure single target encounters. Rend you want in basically all cases, and that combines with Blood and Thunder to make Thunderclap apply your Rend for free on bosses, so you don't actually need to put Rend on your bar ever, but you do want to talent it so that Blood and Thunder applies Rend for you. On this next row, we have a ton of good options. We have AoE Interrupt. You're going to want to use this on Mythic Razagath, Mythic Dathia, those fights in particular. It's really strong on. It's also really good in Mythic Plus as well, although some people, you can't always take it, right? Because sometimes you want to take the other talents, and you only have so many points here. This choice node, we have Show of Force, making Revenge buff the damage of your next Thunderclap by 20%, and increases Revenge damage itself by 10%. Or Sudden Death, which gives you Execute procs, free Execute procs. Sudden Death, really good for single target damage. Show of Force, really good for AoE damage. You don't have to take either of them. I've taken both of these on different situations, and I've sometimes not taken this node at all, and just gone around it, but it is a really good node for damage. Thunderlord, giving you extra radius on Demo Shout, and also making it so that Demo Shout cooldown gets reduced whenever you're hitting things with your Thunderclap. This is really good in any kind of multi-target situation. both defensively and offensively, because you almost always will take Booming Voice further down the tree, which makes Demo Shout increase the damage you deal to affected targets. Always take Shield Wall. Bolster, situational, can be taken in Mythic Plus to give you extra shield block uptime. Can be taken on tough raid encounters as well to give you extra last stands and to make your shield block economy a little bit nicer as well on those fights. Spell block is unbelievably OP. It lets you block spells for 20 seconds, and so the way this works is you do need to be pressing your shield block so that you can have a 100% block chance. Otherwise, you're back to RNG blocking, right? But if you have your shield block up, a lot of spells will kill you, and instead will deal like a third of your health if you have spell block up. Really, really, really broken button. It is on a 1.5 minute cooldown though, and it's only up for 20 seconds, so the uptime is the way that you still die with spell block talented, but it's really good in any dungeon that has blockable spells that are dangerous for you, and against several raid encounters as well. Mythic Razagath, great example of a fight where you are going to want spell block for... Mostly actually for the last phase is really good against the tank breaths that you soak there, but it's also good against just the tank slams all throughout the fight. And it just blocks like the periodic damage ticks on that fight as well. It's really good. If you're not in a situation where you are blocking spells, you can instead take Tough as Nails to give you a little bit of extra damage. There's also Bloodborne here. Bloodborne makes your bleeds deal more damage, and this is a really good talent for AoE DPS. If you can afford it, you can take that for just some pure AoE DPS. On this next row, we have Heavy Repercussions and Into the Fray. Heavy Repercussions is a nice, easy button to make your shield slam or your shield block uptime much easier to maintain. Into the Fray, instead, is a better option for just damage. And also, it is good defensively, right? You're going to get 10% extra haste, assuming you have extra targets around you within 10 yards. I use this on most raid fights. For Mythic Plus, I would recommend Heavy Repercussions until you're feeling really comfortable. But if you're feeling really comfortable, swap over to Into the Fray. And as long as you can still keep your shield block up, this is going to be better for you. Heavy Repercussions is really nice, though, to just keep your shield block up and never accidentally take an auto with shield block down. If that's ever happening to you and you don't have this talented, go and talent it. In this row, we have Enduring Defenses, giving you extra shield block uptime. Really nice, keep your shield block longer. Or you can take Massacre here, which is not something that really anybody does. Extra shield block, good talent there. Anger Management, giving you extra avatars and shield walls by spending rage. Another reason you don't want to overcap your rage is so that you can keep fueling your anger management. And then here we have Impenetrable Wall, giving you 3 rage extra on your shield slams and reducing the cooldown of your shield wall, making shield wall actually a button that you can press all the time. That is by far the default choice here. However, there are situations where you're going to want Defender's Aegis. The main one that jumps to mind for me is Mythic Broodkeeper. It can be really nice to have an extra charge of shield wall and use it for back-to-back tank slams if you need to in the last phase. Then this talent node, rarely will you see anybody taking Juggernaut, but Punish is really strong here as well. Shield Slam deals 10% increased damage, reduces enemies' damage against you by 3% for 9 seconds. Multiple punishments may overlap, so you can actually get like 5 of these on a target, and they'll be dealing 15% reduced damage to you, although that does require Shield Slam procs to be happening. But even if that's not happening, Shield Slam doing more damage, great for damage, and enemies' damage against you being reduced by, 6, 9, 12%, depending on the situation. Really, really strong offensive and defensive node. Something where, like, dropping this point and taking this point would make this tree better in a lot of cases. Now, here we have, generally you're going to see, regardless of whether you have, like almost always people are going to have Into the Fray or Heavy Repercussions, but even sometimes when they have Punish or Juggernaut, usually we don't see Enduring Alacrity selected, giving you Stamina, Armor, and Haste, and instead we see Focus Vigor, because this gives you Strength, Armor, and Crit, and Strength is really good. Strength is your best stat, and it's better than Stam. Kind of counterintuitive, a lot of new tanks are like, I want as much Stamina as I can get. Strength is actually your big stat for both defense and offense. So Focus Vigor, we always take. Shield Spec, giving you block chance and block value, we always take. And then we get down here. Now, usually you're going to want to take Shield Charge, Champion's Bulwark, making Shield Charge give you block, a Revenge proc, and Rage. And then you're going to want to press Shield Charge on cooldown as part of your rotation. It helps you with your shield block uptime, right? Because you're getting a shield block extra shield block every 45 seconds. You're generating a boatload of rage, and you're getting a free revenge proc as well out of it, which is doing more threat, more damage for you. And if you have 4-piece, is generating your 4-piece and your 2-piece. Booming Voice, we basically always take extra damage and extra defense because you're getting rage, which you can use on Ignore Pain. Indomitable, we basically always take 10% more health, and every 10 rage you spend heals you for 1% of your max HP. Very powerful effect. Always take Indomitable, pretty much. Violent Outburst, we basically always take. This says, consuming 30 rage grants a stack of Seeing Red, which transforms the 8 stacks into Violent Outburst, causing your next Shield Slam or Thunderclap to deal 200% increased damage, generate 100% more rage, and grant an Ignore Pain. This is really, really strong. This changes your rotation as well, because you ideally want to be playing around your Violent Outbursts. And what you want to be doing is you want to make sure that your Violent Outbursts, especially in single target, are landing on Shield Slams, and especially, if possible, shields. You want to make sure it's on Shield Slams with Shield Block active, because Shield Block increases the damage of your Shield Slam. So let me show you a little bit of how this works, right? So you can see near the middle of my screen, as I'm spending rage here, I'm generating these stacks of Seeing Red, and as I start getting more of them, I can see the number of stacks here. And what you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure that as it's getting close to 8, you're not going to be put in this position right here, where I didn't have a Shield Slam ready. That one wasn't too bad there, but what you want to make sure is that as it turns into Violent Outburst, your next button that you press is a Shield Slam with a shield block up. Now, if we look at the different Shield Slams that I cast here, the average normal hit was 10k, and then my biggest crit was 63k. Now, obviously, I got lucky that you can see the one at 28 seconds on that little graph down in the bottom right. Obviously, I got a little bit lucky that that one crit, but even if it hadn't crit, like, that's way more damage that your Shield Slam will deal while it's activated. Obviously, it is 200% increased damage, right? So, really want this to land on your Shield Slam is basically the long and short of it. The way that this kind of happens bad is if you're in a situation where you're kind of not paying any attention to this, is that you'll be in a spot where your Shield Slam is on cooldown and your Thunderclap is not, and you just kind of by default, you're pressing Thunderclap, right? And so you're just here, you're spending rage, and now your next button is Thunderclap, and bang, you've just Thunderclapped and consumed your Violent Outburst with Thunderclap rather than with Shield Slam. That is a damage loss in almost all cases. The cases where it's not is big AoE, or medium AoE when you have your Avatar up. When you have your Avatar up, Avatar is increasing the damage of your Thunderclap, making it a little bit less bad to spend your Violent Outburst on a Thunderclap. But still, it's something where, like, unless you're on, like, 5 or more targets, and you're an Avatar, almost always you want your Violent Outbursts to go into your Shield Slam. It generates more rage as well, and so that means more defensive value too. The flip side to this is sometimes you need the AoE threat. So on Mythic Razageth, for instance, when the I would hold my Violent Outbursts actually for a Thunderclap, even outside of Avatar, for when the Mythic intermission ads, or when the intermission ads were spawning. That was a case of, like, okay, I need AoE threat, I need snap threat on these mobs, so I am doing that instead. But that's a conscious choice to sacrifice, like, optimal damage and survivability for some threat. Ravager, we basically always take, you just throw this thing down, and generates it makes rage, it makes damage, good button, line it up with your cooldowns if you can. Sometimes your cooldowns get desynced, right? Because Avatar, Shield Wall, like, you have things that are reducing the cooldown of Avatar, things that are reducing the cooldown of Demo Shout. So in those cases, most of the time for damage, just send your cooldowns when they come up. Don't worry too much about syncing them all up, although you can do that depending on how long you would have to wait for your next cooldown to come back up. But I would say that for new players, the biggest sin I see people commit is sitting on their cooldowns for too long. So don't do that. Just press your buttons on cooldown, and as you develop some expertise with the spec, you can start holding cooldowns for a few seconds so that they'll line up with your other ones. Now, down at the very bottom of the tree, there are some choices here. Battering Ram is really good for, making your shield charge crit chance and crit damage go up, and giving you extra auto attack damage and auto attack speed for 20 seconds. Really good, especially for single target damage. Champion's Bulwark we always take, basically. Battle-Scarred Veteran, not something we always take. Actually, a talent I kind of don't like. I have it in this talent tree right now, but it's one that I pretty rarely use. When your health is brought below 30%, you take 80% less damage for 8 seconds, and healing you receive is increased by 100%. Can only occur once every 3 minutes, though. This was really strong at not dying when it procs. It's very hard to die through Battle-Scarred Veteran. The problem with it is that it procs fairly often when you're not actually in too much danger, because 30% is a fairly high threshold for an effect like this to proc. And so for that reason, I only like using it on fights where I really feel like I need the extra survivability that it brings. So this was like Mythic Broodkeeper, I felt like was a really good place for this. This can also be a really good option for just Mythic Plus survivability, because falling over dead in Mythic Plus, as you're learning the spec, something you want to try and minimize happening. So is something that I recommend for new players. Throw this point in here as you're learning the spec, and then take it out and put it into something like Battering Ram for single target damage, Punish, Bolster, Bloodborne, AoE Interrupt, although AoE Interrupt you should already be taking whenever you need to do that kind of stuff. And then the Ravager things, Storm of Steel and Dance of Death, neither of these are really all that commonly taken. You don't have to worry too much about these. Your options are kind of this point, or another point further up the tree. And again, you can take 1, 2, or 3 of the points that are under Challenging Shout. You can take 1, 2, or 3 of the points below Brutal Vitality. You can take or not take Punish. You can take or not take Instigate or Blood Surge. Usually you only want 0 or 1 of these 2 talents. So a huge amount of options on this tree. This is, again, a lot of good stuff that you can do here. If you are ever in doubt, I recommend the website subcreation.net to just go and yoink a build before you do any specific content. So here's how you use this. You go subcreation.net. There's either mplus.subcreation.net or raid.subcreation.net. You click through that Prot Warrior icon, and you will get the ability to copy or see in a talent calculator different Prot Warrior talents. So for instance, here's the most common Prot Warrior talents in the raid, which actually don't... Again, raid, you're going to want to do fight by fight, right? But you can see here pretty standard stuff. Not taking Battle-Scarred Veteran, taking Punish, actually taking Bloodborne for full dam here, and Sudden Death into the fray, Battering Ram, Champion's Bulwark, right, just doing full damage with this build, not taking either of the Shield Wall talents as well. This is going to skew a little bit towards DPS-oriented talents because it's looking at top logs in terms of damage done. So for tanks, you do want to be a little bit careful with that and maybe look a little bit more at what people are actually using for progression. As you get to kind of the later encounters, you're instead going to see people more often using kind of the more defensive options, right? Making sure that they have stuff like Impenetrable Wall or Bolster, right? Taking those points out of Bloodborne and putting them into defensive options instead. But those are that's how you use this for raid. And then for M+, it's obviously even simpler. You can kind of see basic things here. You can go dungeon by dungeon as well, but you can see there's actually a lot of different builds here. No talent tree is being used more than 5% of the time, and people are swapping between all those different options depending on the situation. People are using all kinds of different stuff in different dungeons. So yeah, again, like we're seeing in the Endurance Training Shockwave in dungeons, we're seeing this build actually is one that is taking only 9 points below the threshold to get extra points above the threshold, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so they could actually cut a point above this bottom row, above this bottom area to put an extra point down here, but they've decided that getting access to, Thunderlord or Punish or whatever is more value than that. So again, I don't know how true this is for other classes and specs, but I think this is one of the best talent trees that is out there. There's so many options for playing so many different things here. Almost all of the talents on the tree are getting used in different cases. Really, really cool, really fun to play around with. But this video has gone on for far too long, I believe. So I hope that it has armed you with some information. I hope that it's not been too overwhelming with the talents. I tried to save the talents for last for that reason. I guess I should have probably put at the front. I'll put some beginner talent builds, a beginner talent M+ build, and a beginner raid one in the description, so you can yoink those to get started. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that the guide was good. I'm sure that I've missed some stuff here that should be covered, so especially if there's any inaccuracies or if there's anything big that you think I missed in explaining how Prot Warrior works, put a comment below, and what I'll either do is, if there's one such comment that's really good, I'll just pin it. If there's multiple, maybe I'll summarize all the information from all of them and then pin that one. And so if you are looking to get into Warrior, go check the comments and see what good tips were missed. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.